Today we're going to be looking at the biggest blunder of Hikaru Nakamura's career. This was played in France in a Super GM Blitz tournament. We got two 2800s, Shakir Mamadjarov with the white pieces, Hikaru Nakamura with the black pieces. It's a back and forth game that leads to a joke of an under promotion by Nakamura that ends up costing him the game. Let's get into it. It's a 90 move game. We get a Nimzo Indian by Hikaru, bishop to b4, pinning the knight. Very active way of playing as black. Castles, all mainline stuff. Bishop to g5, pinning the knight. There's no e4 stuff, allowing white to expand in the center. We get c5, black expanding himself, and e3 defending the pawn. Takes. We get these not hanging pawns in the center because there's still a b pawn. So we get these central pawns for white. There's an open c file for black, and right away black strikes in the center, meeting white. There's many ways to play it. Mamadjarov elects to do the exchange variation. Keep in mind this knight is still pinned, so there was no knight takes d5. h6, where's the bishop going to go? Is he going to go back? Is he going to go forward? Both are good. He elects to take, and we get this middle game. Nakamura has the bishop pair. There's a solidified center. White is a little ahead in development, and Nakamura elects to give up the bishop pair, which gives white a backwards pawn that will lead to an isolated pawn position, IQP, but it gives white the open file, which kind of ties down black's bishop. How is Nakamura going to handle that? Well, he's going to put his pawn on b6. Maybe the bishop could go this way. There's no rook b1 threats in the midst anytime soon, so b6, good move. Now knight to d2. Keep in mind, these are 2800s, so Mamadjarov is electing to repurpose the knight. He brought it from f3 to e3 in a matter of a couple moves where it stands better according to him and according to good players, I guess. We got knight g6. Nakamura is also good. He's repurposing his own knight. And now g3, a funny move. So it stops the knight from coming forward. This knight has no advancements. You might be like, doesn't that weaken the light squares? Well, yes, but you can always repurpose your own bishop and fianchetto it. So I love these types of positions where you don't elect to fianchetto in the opening, but rather in the middle game, putting it on g2, clamping down on the holes on the light squares that you created. All right, Mamadjarov is going to get even more aggressive than that. He's going to go f4, over controlling e5. This knight is not good, and he's just going all out for an attack. Keep in mind, it is a blitz game. So we get bishop to d3, covering f5, covering everything on the king side. Nakamura is playing on the queen side, doubling up, and then Mamadjarov undoubles black's rooks. Very nice move, bishop to a6. There's no repeat in the position. They're both playing for a win, and Mamadjarov then strikes with pawn to f5. We get king to h8, kind of prophylactically stepping out of the way of the incoming kingside attack, and we get knight to g8. Knight to g4, it looks like white is taking over this game. It looks like a lot of open lines are about to come towards black's king. How is Nakamura going to defend? He is the best defender of all time in modern day, especially in like King's Indian attacks. Okay, knight to e5, very good. Bishop to e8. Why did Nakamura go bishop to e8? Well, he saw a fork in one move. So he stops the fork in one move, and white's position is coming to life. Somehow, the bar slightly prefers black. I would argue differently. Queen to f4 and rook to d8, a mistake. Can you see how white can win the game right now? Win at the top level. The move, knight to g6. You might be like, knight to g6? That looks like it loses a knight. Well, it doesn't because it picks up a bishop and black's king is very much frozen. All right, we'd get like g takes, bishop takes. Bishop is 10 times better than the knight. This would be a hard hold for black for sure. But instead, Mamadjarov elects to go rook e3. Okay, a rook lift. And now for some odd reason, Nakamura does not take the c3 pawn. He kind of just needs to absorb the attack, which he usually does, but he responds to it. And sometimes when you respond to an attack, that's what makes the attack so strong. So we get knight to g6. King here would be a mistake due to the trade and the endgame that would be winning for white. So Nakamura has to take the knight with the bishop. We get some trades, and all of a sudden, we get a transposition into what we could have gotten before. This king is very much weak. The bishop dominates the knight, and we're already claiming the open file that we need to claim. So we get bishop takes b5, bishop to d3, and Nakamura picks up the c3 pawn. So what do you do here? Well, it's kind of a Zooks 1 position. What you should do is double up and kind of expand, make as many improvements in your position as possible before taking the knight and infiltrating on the 7th. Shakhriyar immediately takes the knight, and we get this endgame where you are threatening mate, and it looks all good. But again, we got one of the best defenders of all time. He's going to defend against checkmate. Rook to f7, this cannot get taken because that will be a promotion of a pawn. No way to stop that guy. So Nakamura correctly goes rook to g8. Shahryar picks up a pawn, Nakamura does the same, and we're off to the races. White is better simply because he has an outside passed pawn. But then he goes rook to d1, throwing the whole advantage. You see, rook to g4 is going to pick up the g-pawn. You have to be as fast as possible. You really need to push the pawn, get behind the pawn, and go cash in, or cash out rather, on the a-pawn being the best pawn on the board. Rather than that, maybe they were in time pressure. He's like, I'm just going to go into a position. Surely I cannot lose this. But he ends up throwing. So Shahryar ends up going king to f3. We get h5. We go back, trying to attack the h5 pawn, win that pawn with check. Nakamura forces the king back, and we get king to h3 and rook to g5. Now, these are doubled pawns that would actually be good. It would create a mating box for black, that is. And, okay, they're not doubled, but he's still going to create a mating box. The threat is g4, king h4, and rook takes h2 checkmate. Does Shahryar see it? Yes, he does. He goes g4. Nakamura wins a pawn, but that pawn is going to be won back very shortly. We get king g7, he snags the pawn, and it's a very equal position. Unfortunately for white, the rook is guarding the pawn from the side. Nakamura is trying to get active with his king, with his pawns now. We get a check, and he gets behind the passed pawn. Very good. Shahryar picks up a check, forcing the king back, and then gets in front of his pawn. This is like a complete book endgame draw. However, it is blitz, and after the move king f4, it's hard to draw. How do you draw? You actually have to give up your a-pawn. Don't squeeze your rook behind it and allow them to force your king back. You have to go rook to g8, losing the pawn. And the point is, you know, it looks very scary, but anytime this king progresses, you're going to take the g-pawn. And even if they push, for example, take, that's a drawn rook and pawn endgame because your king is the more active king in front of the promotion square. Rook and pawn versus rook and king, when your king is the more active king, is going to be a draw. Your king is right where it needs to be. But instead, Shahryar pushes the pawn. And now Nakamura is winning. He gives a check, goes king f3, threatening checkmate in 1. Very good. Shahryar has to move his king, and Nakamura is just going to start pushing some pawns. So why is this winning for black? Well, this is winning for black because he's just going to make a queen. There's nothing white could do about it. We get pawn to h5, rook to h3, getting behind the pawn, rook to f5, and f3. The king, now you see black's king is more active than white's king, so it's the winning version. Plus his rook is where it needs to be, stopping the flank pawn. All right, Nakamura is getting the king to f1 so that he could push. Why did he not push the pawn to f2? This comes with check, and this was the way to win this position. Right, we'd get something of the sort of king to d2, and essentially you're just going to put your rook on h1, hide the king here, promote the pawn, and then you're in time to stop the flank pawn. So that was the winning idea for black. However, for some odd reason, he goes king to g2, and it's a draw again. We get pawn to f2 check. What's the difference? The difference is the king is not where it needs to be, and now they're going to take with a tempo gainer, a check rather. So here, all Nakamura had to do was promote to a queen, and this is a draw. Rook takes, king and rook versus king and rook. However, instead he jokingly promoted to a knight. He was like, it's going to be the same thing, take. But it's not. Shahryar capitalized on the winning idea, rook to f2 check. It's still a draw, but you have to play very accurately as black, and I'm assuming they were under time pressure. The point is, if the king goes up to g3, you go rook f3 check, you pick up the rook, you take the knight, and that pawn is just a queen. It's just too far advanced in front of the king. So because of this, Nakamura had to go king to g1. Shahryar picks up the knight with check, gives another check, and it's still a draw, but now if anybody's playing for a win, it is white. So Nakamura is going to cut the king off on the third. The rook is guarding from behind, which is not the greatest, so it's still a draw. He pushes the pawn, we get rook back to h3, and he still has to guard from the side. We get king h2, king f2, and rook to h4. All right, still a draw, but there's only one drawing move. What black has to do is he has to go king h3, king h2 for the rest of the game, and white would have to slide on the 6th. So he does go king h3, but he doesn't go king h2. He goes rook a4. And this is now losing. Shahryar doesn't see it right away, but rook to g1 was the idea. Threatening checkmate, you're going to push the pawn and promote, and he's just not in time. If rook a3, the king just goes up and supports the pawn to promotion. But instead he pushes the pawn again. That's two pawns he pushed too fast, but understandable, probably due to time. We get rook to g7, and again, the only drawing mechanism is king h2, king h3. Instead, Nakamura goes rook h6, allowing white's king into the position. And shortly after this check, Nakamura resigns. This is just a losing game because wherever the king moves, you're just going to go king here and promote the pawn. And it's king and rook versus king. 2800s know how to checkmate in that position. So Nakamura's biggest throw of all time, unless you guys have seen worse. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. Peace.